Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back to another interview on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. This is organized by the ISKCON Ministry of Education. Books are the basis, and we're trying to encourage everyone to read more often in Srila Prabhupada's books. And for that reason, we interview different senior devotees and talking about their realizations on the importance of reading. So today, we are very honored to have with us His Grace Vaiyasaki Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you for joining us. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Of course, I'm sure many of our viewers will know Vaiyasaki Prabhu. He's like a Kirtan legend in our Hare Krishna movement. Vaiyasaki Prabhu was originally born in London, in UK, but then grew up in Canada. And then also a natural musician, started a music career as a rock and blues guitarist. And of course, later came in touch with Krishna consciousness back in London, and also received initiation from Srila Prabhupada in 1975, I believe. And I also, on the invitation of Srila Prabhupada, went to India and traveled there, actually in the entire subcontinent in Southeast Asia, and discovered the different kirtan styles, learned from many different kirtanis, local kirtanilis there, and then developed his own kirtan style. And has become one of the great kirtanis of our movement. Many of us have been grown up with listening to Vaiyasaki's CDs. I remember in the kitchen, there was always Vaiyasaki Kirtan going on while I was cooking. So great to have you on this interview. Of course, Vaiyasaki Prabhu today lives with his wife in Vrindavan and is traveling several months a year around the world, sharing Kirtan in different yoga studios, temples, centers, and spreading the glory of the holy name. So I'm looking forward to hear from you about your realization on reading, also the connection between reading and Kirtan. And so let's start maybe with your story, how you came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books. Do you remember what was the first book you received? And
Yes, I remember.
Okay.
So how it all began was in the summer of 1968. I met some Indians in Toronto. I was living in Toronto, Canada, and I became friendly with one Mr. Sengupta, and he invited me to his home and for dinner, and his wife cooked. And then while Mr. Sengupta and I were speaking in the front room, she walked past us with a tray full of dishes, went into another room, started ringing the bell. I didn't know then what she was doing, but now I realize she was offering prasad. So I had the first prasad there in the summer of 68. And we had a very wonderful talk. And he was telling me all about Calcutta and chanting of mantras, and that people go out in the streets with drums and cymbals and chant mantras, and they're called Vaishnavas. So all these things he was telling me. Then he said, when I was going to leave, he said, we have a Sunday satsang, all the Indian community, would you like to attend? So I said, okay. And I went there that Sunday. And when I arrived, the program was already going on. So I just quietly crept in and sat at the back. And at the front, they had a kirtan group, a singer playing harmonium, a drummer, and the cartels, and they were singing, and it was beautiful music. I'd never heard kirtan before. I loved it. And then I noticed that they were repeating the same words over and over again. So I focused very strongly at full concentration. And then when I was able to comprehend the mantra, they were chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. At that moment, a wave of emotion swept over my body from my feet all the way up to my head, and tears came to my eyes, and I was startled by that. Why is this music affecting me like this? And I was looking at other people, and they're all just smiling and normal. and I'm going through this emotional experience. So later on, I realized that this was a memory from the past life, that I'd been involved in kirtan in a past life, and now I was hearing it again. So that was the summer of 1968. And then I started reading books on yoga. The books I came across were the ones that were popular at the time: Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, Be Here Now, Vivekananda, Ramakrishna. I was reading all those books. And on January 1st, 1969, I decided to become a vegetarian, just on my own. So I became a vegetarian, and I was totally into yoga. Then in the spring of 1969, I went down to the center of town, and all of a sudden I heard ching, 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 ching. I turned the corner, and there were the ISKCON devotees. It was the first time I'd seen the ISKCON devotees. And so I stopped and listened to their kirtan. And I was thinking, oh, these are the Vaishnavas that Mr. Sengupta told me about. So while I was listening, one devotee came up and distributed a Back to Godhead magazine to me. So I gave a donation, took the magazine. And then after some time, I walked on. Now their kirtan, the ISKCON devotees' kirtan, was nothing at the level of the Bengali kirtan. But again, it was the second time I heard the Maha Mantra. And now I got Prabhupada's book. Well, I got his magazine. So the first thing I did when I returned home was I read the article by Srila Prabhupada. But I found it difficult to understand because I had been, misled, I suppose, by the Mayavad philosophy of the other books that I'd been reading. So I couldn't really grasp it. Because I was thinking in terms of Mayavad and the language that they used. So that was my first experience, and that was in Toronto. Then later in 1970, I went back to London because I was born in London, but educated in Canada. So at the end of my education, material education, that is, I went back to London, and then walking in the Soho district of London, I heard ching, 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 ching. I turned the corner, and there were the English devotees. So I said, oh, they're here too. So Mahavishnu Das approached me, and we spoke and everything. Eventually, I got invited to go to the temple. And so I had darshan of the deities, Sri Sri Radha Landanishwar. They were the first deities I ever saw in Berry Place Temple. It was a wonderful experience. And that's how I got started.
So it was a Back to Godhead magazine, but of course it was mainly the Maha Mantra that kind of brought you in. Yeah,
it was the Maha Mantra and the fact that I took prasadam that actually purified me enough that I was able to come to the next level. So then I was making friends with the devotees, and one devotee, Charanarvindam, he distributed 3 books to me. He sold me 3 books: Ishopanishad, Krishna book, and Bhagavad Gita as it is. So I started reading Bhagavad Gita as it is. Now I was already following a path of yoga by this time. I had met a guru, I'd met different gurus, and I would join their movement and check it out just to see. And then I always thought if something better comes along, I'll move on. So I had moved on from several gurus. And now that I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, I was following the teachings of one Narayanananda Swami, Kundalini Yoga, it was Ashtanga Yoga and Pranayam. So doing the Pranayam and the breath of fire and everything. And I was very austere. I was eating only dates, medjool dates, and goat's milk. I would take a drink of goat's milk, take a little date, chew them together. That's all I ate for months. So at the temple, when they offered me Mahaprasad, I said, oh my God, this is way too rich, too opulent. I can't eat that. So I wasn't taking prasad because I was following this Ashtanga Yoga. And I was reading Bhagavad Gita, and I was astonished, And I was thinking, wow, this is amazing. What does it mean? either Krishna is God, the Supreme Lord that created everything, or this is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind. I wasn't sure. It's either one or the other. So I had to find out. Meanwhile, I'm doing all these exercises trying to raise the Kundalini Shakti to the Brahmarandra and to experience enlightenment. And I'm following along in Narayanananda Swami's book. And at the end of the book, on the last chapter, in the last page, he writes, there are other methods of raising the Kundalini. And the other methods were Kirtan and Japa. So I was thinking, why am I doing all this heavy austerity? Let me just go to the Hare Krishnas and do Kirtan and Japa and get the same result. And so then I thought, okay, so I left him, went to join Prabhupada's movement, and I was always thinking the same. If something better comes along, then I can always move on. But that was like 50 years ago, and nothing better ever came along. So I'm still here.
So wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story. So maybe we can also, you could just share your realization on, just in general, why do you feel it's important that we read daily in Srila Prabhupada's books?
Well, because in Srila Prabhupada's books, in every chapter, he's always stressing the chanting of the Maha Mantra. And the chanting of this Maha Mantra will clean the heart, clean the mind, purify our consciousness, and we can develop love of Godhead and go back home, back to Godhead. So in every chapter, he's talking like this. All the books, they're dealing with the Leela of different avatars, but it always comes back to chanting the mantra. So I was into chanting the mantra and reading Prabhupada's books. I read the Bhagavad Gita and I came to the temple to see if Krishna actually was God. And by following the process of devotional service, bhakti yoga and chanting, I gradually came to understand, okay, Krishna is God. Let me take up this path and see where it leads me. So just like that. So the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books is to confirm that the chanting of Hare Krishna is the most important service we can do.
Actually, I just wanted to ask you, since you're a Kirtani, how do you see the connection between reading and Kirtan? So by your answer, you already kind of indicated that. Maybe you can speak a little bit more on that point.
Okay.
Because yeah, Kirtan has become also nowadays, it's very popular, many also younger generation of devotees. And in general, Kirtan has become quite big in ISKCON and everyone is doing Kirtan, but reading seems to be not so popular. Maybe you could say something on that, how reading actually enhances the Kirtan and vice versa.
Okay, so the most important thing in devotional service is Shravanam. And in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 6th chapter, Krishna is telling Arjuna, you have to control your mind. And Arjuna says, control my mind. It's easier for me to control the wind than it is to control my mind. And Krishna says in chapter 6, shloka number 35, yes, it's not easy, but it can be done. And then he explains how it can be done by suitable practice, abhyas, and detachment. So by detachment, we become attached to Krishna, and that way we give up detachment. And by hearing, we allow sound vibration, which is non-different than Krishna, to enter into our heart. So Prabhupada, in that purport, he mentions that the supermost excellent practice, sadhana, is Shravanam, which I thought would be he would say Kirtanam, but he said Shravanam. And when I meditated on it, I realized that Shravanam is much more important, and reading the books is Shravanam. Because if your Shravanam is good, your Kirtanam will be good, and your Smaranam will be good. But if the Shravanam is bad, the Kirtanam will be bad, and you'll have zero Shravanam. Smaranam. Zero Smaranam. So Shravanam is the prerequisite for good kirtanam and good smaranam. And Prabhupada dictated all his books. So by reading his books, we're hearing him. We're hearing what he said, transcribed into black and white on a book, on paper. So it's also kirtan. So hearing the glorification of the Lord or the glorification of the devotees is kirtan. Singing the glorification of the Lord or devotional glories of the Vaishnavas is kirtan. So however the Shravanam enters into you, either through the eyes or through the ears, it's the glorification of the Lord and his devotees. And that is the basis, the foundation of Bhakti Yoga. So how do we do it? In the books, Prabhupada explains how we do it. There's a right way and a wrong way to do everything in the material world. So the right way is in a humble state of mind. Das, 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 anudas. You have to come to that humility because Krishna does not like ahankara. He says in the Bhagavad Gita, ahankara vimud atma. The atma, due to ahankara, becomes a muda, but not any muda, a vimuda, the biggest muda of all. So we have to become humble. Trinadapi sunichena, taroringva sahishnuna, amanina manadena kirtaniya sadahari. So I was thinking, how can I possibly become more humble than the grass? How is it possible? So I meditated on that because I know Krishna says in the Gita and other places that he fulfills the desires of his devotees. So whenever I want to know something, I meditate deeply on it to let Krishna know this is my desire. So then Krishna said, when I wanted to know how to become more humble than the grass and more tolerant than the tree, he said, look no further. Keep reading the shloka. Amanina, manadena. Amanina means I desire no honor or respect. So if people don't honor me, they don't respect me, maybe they find fault with me, whatever, I'm happy because I don't want honor and respect. And if they come and they do give me honor and respect, then I just say, no, it's not me, it's Srila Prabhupada. You're honoring the wrong person. I was fool number one before I met Prabhupada, and only because of Prabhupada I'm able to speak, so he gets the credit. And then manadena, you give all honor and respect to other people. And that's how you become more humble than the grass, by giving everyone else the honor and respect, and more tolerant than the tree by not desiring any honor or respect. And then what happens when we attain this, or when we live our life like this? Kirtaniya sadahari, that Krishna will now accept our kirtan. We'll be able to chant Hare Krishna always, eternally. Why? Because Krishna's accepting it. If we chant with false ego, he may not accept it after a while. In the beginning, he may accept it because we're new devotees, we're young, we're like children. But if after 40 or 50 years, you're still at the same level, then we're making zero progress, and Krishna may just not accept it anymore. So we really have to learn these things by reading Prabhupada's books, learning about the 10 offenses. We don't know these things due to Prabhupada's books. So if we don't read Prabhupada's books, we won't know how to properly perform the process of Bhakti Yoga. And we'll commit offenses, and we end up leaving because Lord Chaitanya will show us the door and say, you're not ready for it this time, maybe next life, try again.
Beautifully explained the importance of Shravanam. If you want to do Kirtanam first, you need to hear, and then you do Kirtan, and then you can remember. I also like how you explained that actually Srila Prabhupada spoke and he dictated, and what we hear in the form of the books is actually Prabhupada's spoken words, and this is also Shravanam in that sense, that we're listening. Maybe that leads us to another. Yeah, you.
Well, here's another point. Prabhupada said, you can't see Krishna because he's completely spiritual, but you see Krishna through your ears. We hear the sound vibration. That's how we see Krishna. And with the reading of the books, we hear the tattva through the eyes. So we hear through the eyes and see through the ears, because this is spiritual. This is totally spiritual. That's nothing to do with material conceptions, you know.
Right. Now, maybe that leads us to another question in regards to how Prabhupada is present in his books. Would you like to share maybe some realization? You being a Prabhupada disciple yourself, you have met Prabhupada, listened from Prabhupada. I think you, in Los Angeles, I think you listened a lot of lectures from Prabhupada, got a chance to directly hear from him. And then, of course, Prabhupada is not anymore with us. But then taking up Prabhupada's books, how do you feel Prabhupada's presence in his books? And how can others also access Prabhupada's presence through reading?
Well, I feel his presence by the way he answers philosophical points and philosophical questions. He answers from such a deep level, from such a perspective. And so we learn how to answer and how to actually go out and share Krishna consciousness with others from Prabhupada by reading his books. Not only reading his books, but by hearing his classes. Because hearing his classes and reading his books, it's all Shravanam. And many of the things that I repeat when I share Krishna consciousness with people, I learned from Srila Prabhupada. People may say to me, wow, you really have a deep understanding. I have no understanding. I heard from Srila Prabhupada and I'm repeating what I heard. This is the parampara system. I haven't changed anything. I haven't subtracted or added anything. I repeat what I've heard. And sometimes Paramatma will inspire me to say something that I haven't heard. And then later on, when reading Prabhupada's books, I see that was in Prabhupada's books, what I said, even though I hadn't read that part yet. So it makes me think, wow, I'm really in tune with the tattva, that even what I haven't read, Paramatma is making me speak, and then I see that Prabhupada also spoke it. So it's amazing. So you really develop a relationship with Prabhupada this way.
That's beautiful. How the way the books talk to you, answer the questions, that's how you feel Prabhupada's presence. And I think that also turns into a way we see the world. We speak about this Shastra Chakshu, that when we more and more absorb in Krishna conscious philosophy, we start to see the world in a certain way.
Exactly.
Through the eyes of Shastra.
So basically, I remember hearing and attending many classes and darshans of Srila Prabhupada. And most of the time he said that we should study his books. Then he also said we should distribute his books. And then he finally also said we should read his books. But reading his books was the last thing that he said. The most important thing that he said over and over and over again was to study the books. And there's a difference between studying and reading. And we all know how to study because we went to college. We were in the education system. And to study means you keep a notebook and you jot down important points. Or you also have a yellow marker and you mark the most important points so you can come back and study again and again and then remember these things. Whereas if you're just reading, you're not actually studying. So how do I study? I study, but because I'm doing research. I may be researching a particular point, let's say Kirtan, for example, and I'll try to find everything that Prabhupada said about Kirtan, so that gradually you become quite knowledgeable about Kirtan. Then you may want to study what Prabhupada said about Shravanam, so you become a little expert on Shravanam. So by studying topics that you want to know more about, you become well known in those topics. And that's how I like to read Prabhupada's books, by not like so much just reading, but studying the way we used to study when we were in college.
It's like a kind of an active reading where you have a certain question in mind and you really go for some research in the books.
Yeah.
Actually, people know you as a great Kirtaniya, but you're also an author of several books. I think you mentioned 6 books you have been publishing over the years.
Yeah.
And I think that one is the Sri Damodar Vilas, which describes the story of the Sankirtan party of Vishnujan, and Ramakrishna Goswami in the early days in America, and you also have written other books. Where do you see the connection between reading and writing? Because it's interesting, Prabhupada emphasized the reading, but Prabhupada also encouraged the devotees to write. Would you like to talk about that aspect, reading and writing?
Okay, Prabhupada wanted every devotee to write their realizations. Even if you just write one line in your notebook, something you realized or remember or thought was important. So when I had this idea to glorify the Radha Damodar party and Vishnujan Swami and Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I went and interviewed 500 devotees. When I came to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he asked, "Do you have an outline?" I said, "Yeah, let me see it." I showed him my outline. He looked at it very carefully. Then he said, "This is the history of the Sankirtan movement." I said, "Yeah, that's what it is." And I was researching it because I wanted the book to be shastric. I couldn't put anything in there that was unauthorized or mental speculation. So I double-checked and triple-checked and researched every point that I said in Prabhupada's books to make sure that what I was writing was bona fide and authoritative. And so the writing has to be bona fide and authoritative. Otherwise, what's the value of writing? If you're speculating, you have an opinion. We're not interested in opinions. We're interested in tattva, the truth.
So you wrote that book on the Kirtan history. I think you also wrote one book on Krishna conscious and scientific approach. You'd like to share about all those projects you have?
Well, I wrote 2 books for the devotees, Radha Damodar Vilas, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and then 4 books for the non-devotees, but also the devotees, but also for non-devotees. So the first one was Cosmology on Trial, because we're building the Vedic temple, the planetarium. And so people will come and say, well, this is just mythology. It's not real. So I wanted to show that actual science is also not real, that there are basic theories that keep changing from time to time. And so I wrote that book, Cosmology on Trial, to show that every aspect of our cosmological explanation is just a possible theory. They don't have proof. And one of the points I made was that in my physics exam, when I was in high school, if I would have I gave the same answers today as I did then when I got a passing grade. If I gave the same answers today, I would fail, because all the points that were accepted then are no longer accepted. So it's always changing. It's always becoming fine-tuned as they get more and more information. So I was just wanting to show that as any people came to the temple of Vedic Planetarium and said, oh, this is not real, this is just mythology. Here, read this book. What you think is scientific is identically, it's the same. There's no proof, not even for gravity. They don't even know where gravity is located or what kind of a force it is. They just know that it's there. They can measure its impact, but what it is, where it's located, they haven't got a clue. So we think that scientific explanations are valid and scientific, but they're not. Then I wrote a second book, Stephen Hawking on Trial, because Stephen Hawking was the topmost physicist. And I showed that he was the biggest mental speculator of everything. For example, I gave many examples. This one example, that he admits that we only know 4% of our universe. 96% of the universe are forces and energies that we do not know. Therefore, we call them dark energy and dark matter, because we don't know what they are. But we feel something must be there. And then later on, he says that we don't need to go to God and religion because the scientific account is complete. So I made the point. How can it be complete with only 4%, 96% unknown, and you're saying it's complete? So in this book, I smashed Stephen Hawking because he was such a mental speculator. So those were the two scientific books I wrote. And then I wrote two other scientific books on the disease, in particular, the COVID disease. So these are all published on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So coming back to reading and Prabhupada's books, so basically by writing books also that enhanced your reading, because in order to write you need to do research. So that would be one way to enhance one's reading by writing, right?
Right. So that's what I did. I read and read and read, and I made notes. I took notes. And then I went over my notes, and then I put the right, I had so much mountain of data, and then I had to put the data in the right place at the right time, so I really had to do a lot of research, to make it 100% bona fide. My Radha Vilas books, and everything I learned from Srila Prabhupada. He was my teacher in every aspect of my life.
How would you think it would be ISKCON a different movement if actually devotees would read, like if all the devotees would read daily an hour? What would it change in our Hare Krishna movement?
Well, then people wouldn't speculate as much. There's a lot of speculation going on, and people don't realize there's 4 regulative principles. Most people only practice 3 regulative principles. The 4th regulative principle, which is mental speculation and gambling, dozens of times every day. And mental speculation is gambling, because gambling means you have 2 possible outcomes. You're right or you're wrong. But when you quote Shastra, there's only 1 possible outcome. You're right. So therefore, mental speculation is gambling. And that Prabhupada said, no gambling, no mental speculation. You research, you quote Shastra. Then what you're saying is bona fide and authoritative.
Now, we spoke already a bit about studying. You shared how we are supposed to study like we did in university. Do you have any tips or advices for devotees how they could overcome the obstacles in reading Prabhupada's books? Like some devotees feel they don't have time, or they have a lack of taste, or they're tired. So what could be possible,
Well, in the beginning, I was experiencing those things too. I had some free time, so let me read the Bhagavatam. And as I'm reading, I start yawning, feeling tired, So we all go through this at the beginning. And I remember one time in 1974, I was sitting in the temple room during the afternoon and reading one book, I forget which one. And one devotee came up to me and said, all you really have to do is chant Hare Krishna, and then all the purports of all the books will become known to you. So at that point, I just said, okay, right. I didn't take it seriously. But later on, I found out this is the case. The more we chant, the more we're able to understand and remember and grasp what Prabhupada's teaching us. And I was already saying earlier that I like to do research. So I want to find out things. I want to find out about, let's say, cooking, about prasadam, about kirtan, about whatever it is. And so now I'm researching and studying and finding out the things about what I'm interested in. Maybe I'm not interested that Muchakunda slept in the cave for so many years, and when he came back out, everybody else had died. That maybe doesn't apply in my day-to-day life. But what does apply are these points of the philosophy that I'm dealing with. And so that it's so interesting that I never get tired, never fall asleep. Or if I'm doing it for a couple of hours, I need to take a break, but that's, basically it. And the reason is because the interest is there. You have to be so interested in what Prabhupada's saying. And when the interest is there, then the intelligence becomes awakened. And you don't feel tired. You feel enlivened.
I think that's a brilliant point, that if we are eager to know something, we have a certain desire. I want to really understand this, and then you read, you're more alert, more awake to accept the knowledge.
Right. It's like a search. You're searching for the answers. It's interesting. It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's a discovery.
Is there anything, like, of course, we study, we absorb things. As I can imagine, especially if you write, you have, as you mentioned, you have experience in writing books. That means also we need to really absorb that knowledge, to contemplate about what we have read. And then also it's about applying what we have read. We want to live according to Shastra. What can devotees do to apply this transcendental knowledge that we receive from Prabhupada?
Well, first, we have to give our full concentration when we're reading, when we're studying, when we're hearing. So Prabhupada was saying that chanting and reading has to be done with care and attention. Attention means full focus, full concentration. And care means you have some feeling, you're caring about it. Care also means to be careful that you're doing it correctly. So when you do something with full concentration and interest, with a desire to know, then it enters into your ear and into your heart. And then we're able to remember it. But if we're just reading for the sake of reading, because I have to read, okay, I got an hour. Okay, now I got 50 minutes done. Oh, only 10 minutes left. That kind of reading goes in one ear and stays in the mind for some time, but doesn't enter deep into the heart. And so later on, we can't remember it. We can't bring it back out because the consciousness is in the heart, not in the mind. So we really have to bring it down to the level of the heart, to the level of consciousness, and then we'll be able to remember. So the reading has to be done conscientiously, with full care and attention, so that what Prabhupada is saying enters deep into our heart. And then we have to learn to become living truth, that what we say and what we preach to others and what we think and what we do has to all be in consonance with the teachings of Shastra, Guru, Krishna, and Shastra.
That's an interesting point, in that if you read with our heart, if we are really, as you said, you mentioned careful, like, then we are able to also absorb more and remember that knowledge. Yeah. Would you like to share what is your favorite books of Srila Prabhupada, or which books or which pastimes or passages you prefer to read mostly in Prabhupada?
Well, the favorite books changed over the years. So the beginning, my favorite book was Bhagavad Gita as it is. And it's still one of my favorite books. Then after that, Chaitanya Charitamrita became my favorite book. And I was only studying Chaitanya Charitamrita. And then I started reading the Bhagavatam, studying the Bhagavatam. So now they're all my favorite books. But I went through different phases of which is my favorite, because there's something for everybody in each one of the books. The thing about Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's the lifestyle of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates is very similar to our lifestyle. We're doing the same things. We're chanting the same way. We're going out and distributing. We're bringing the holy name to every town and village. So we can very much relate to it. Whereas the Bhagavatam, sometimes it's difficult to relate to these pastimes that appear in different yugas and maybe in even different, Brahmandas, But the philosophy is there. And we see how the devotees in different yugas and different places were dedicated to service of the Lord. And then the Bhagavad Gita is the direct words of Krishna. So I have many favorite slokas in Bhagavad Gita, but one of my favorites is Ye yatamam prapadyante tamstataiva bhajamyaham. As you approach me, I reciprocate accordingly. Why I love this verse is because here Krishna is telling us how we can establish a loving relationship with him. We take the first step and we approach him and we ask a question, or we have some desire, or we want to do some seva or whatever. And we approach him and then he reciprocates with us. So I always tell people, sometimes they want to know who's my guru. So I said, well, you may not know who your guru is. There's so many choices, but Krishna knows who your guru is. So why don't you approach Krishna and ask him? And he'll tell you who your guru is. Just say, my dear Lord Krishna, I don't know who my guru is, but you do. So please direct me that I choose the right guru. So I always tell people not to take Krishna out of the equation. He has to become number one. We approach him first and he reciprocates. And he reinforces this again and again and again throughout the Gita. Sarva dharman parityaja, all the dharmas I spoke to you earlier, mam ekam sharanam vacham. This is the most important. Bhagavad dharma, surrender unto me wherever you go, every step you take. So I was just speaking to one devotee yesterday, and he was saying that, he's having a little difficulty with his face. And I say, look, what you're doing is you're doing all the rituals. You're doing all the rituals. You're dedicated to the rituals, but you're not establishing your relationship with the Lord. And the rituals are nice, but if you don't establish the relationship, then what is the point? You have to start talking to the Lord. You have to see his hand in your life. You have to listen to him when he speaks, because the Lord is always instructing us. I give you an example. This morning, before taking prasad, I was going to take prasad, and then I heard a little voice said, wash your hands. And then I was thinking to myself, yeah, but my hands are clean. I already washed them a few minutes ago. And then I remembered, I got to follow that voice. I have to learn to follow the inner voice. That's Paramatma speaking. So I went and washed my hands a second time. So we have to train ourselves to hear the inner voice, because Krishna is always guiding us from within. Our problem is we never trust Krishna. That's when he has Masucha in 1866. Aham means don't worry. Why do we worry? Because we Krishna. If we trusted him 100%, we wouldn't have any doubts. We wouldn't worry. So these are our problems. We have to overcome them. Trust Krishna, follow his voice. He speaks to us, and just do it, and you'll be perfectly situated. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for sharing these realizations. I don't know, do you have any final words to our listeners, some concluding words, something you'd like to share with us before we close on the importance of reading and your realizations on that topic?
Well, one of the things that I have is that there are people that send out Prabhupada quotations online. So I subscribe to all of them. And so every day I'm reading a Prabhupada Leela, or Prabhupada said this, or, a philosophical point that Prabhupada made to some professor. So even if I'm traveling and I'm not near a book, I'm always getting Prabhupada Katha. I'm always getting his teachings. So that's a tip I would do, is just subscribe to all these online services that send out Prabhupada Katha every day. Then you're always connected. And the thing is this, every devotee in ISKCON should be fully absorbed and totally surrendered to Prabhupada. And the reason is because when you're totally surrendered to Prabhupada, it means you're totally surrendered to your own guru, because your guru is following Prabhupada. So if you're following Prabhupada and he's following Prabhupada, you're following each other. You're both rightly situated. So don't worry, what does my guru think about this or that, or will he be pleased with this or that? Follow Prabhupada, and then your guru will automatically be pleased, because he's also following Prabhupada. So that's another tip I could give.
Thank you so much. That's the idea. We read Prabhupada's books and keep Prabhupada always in the center of our lives. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for sharing your realization on this important topic. It was great to talk to you and hear your realizations. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I appreciate very much that you requested me to speak something, and I hope that the devotees who hear this will get some benefit from my words. Hare Krishna.
I'm sure. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama